I'm Jeb Butler of the Butler Law Firm. As crime rises around Atlanta, we thought it might be a good time to make a video talking about some of the things that businesses can do and should be doing to keep their customers safe. In Georgia, as in most states, when a business knows that its customers are at risk, often because there's a lot of crime in that area and a lot of robberies or other violent crimes, the business has an obligation to keep its customers reasonably safe. We can be talking about tenants in an apartment complex, patrons in a restaurant, guests in a hotel. Anytime an owner or an operator of a business knows about crime in the area, they need to keep the people who come to their place to do business reasonably safe. And when they don't, victims can hold those businesses liable in Georgia's court system. I want to talk first about some of the things that responsible businesses do to keep their customers safe. We call these security measures. And the first thing that a responsible business ought to do to keep customers safe is to run what we call run a crime grid. And that just means contact the Atlanta Police Department, the DeKalb Police Department, whatever the local law enforcement agency is, and through an open records request, get a list of crime in that area. You can get a list that's several years long and look at everything that's happened at or near a certain address. And that'll give a business owner a pretty good idea of what the risk level is and what they need to do to keep their paying customers safe. The first thing that comes to mind, and one of the best, is security guards. If a business knows they got problems with crime in the area, there's really no substitute for live people in uniforms out there on the property. The fact that they're there will usually keep the crime away. And if something does happen, of course, they're there to help. ID in and out. Now, this is mostly about apartment complexes and hotels, but we've all entered an apartment complex and seen the little guard booth there. Well, if crime is a problem in the area, then the apartment can check IDs at the gate so that only people who have any business there can go in. So you would have only tenants and their guests entering the apartment complex. It keeps criminals out. The very fact that they're going to be checked when they go in tends to make people behave. So that's always a good measure of crime as a problem. Another is lights. And this is really simple, but a lot of times when we get called on a case and we find out that something really bad has happened at an apartment complex or in the parking lot of a restaurant or something like that, often we find the lights weren't working. They'll have lights, like big street lights, but they just don't work. I don't know if they're not changing the bulbs or not paying the power bill or what. But lighting is a good and inexpensive way to keep crime to a minimum because most violent crime happens at night. Gates. Now, this is a really big one. A lot of times when we get a call about a shooting or a stabbing or a sexual assault that's occurred in an apartment complex, and when we get in our car, drive in there and check it out, one of the things we often find is that the gate doesn't work. We'll find a gate that's slid open or pushed open, and you can tell by looking at it, maybe because the gate open and close mechanism is rusted out or covered up with leaves or something like that. You can tell it's been stuck open for a long time. That allows free access to any criminal in the area. And that's a bad move by any business. Another is cameras. Obviously, people are less likely to commit crimes if they think they might get caught. So cameras can help. We'll next talk a little bit about Georgia law in this area. When we bring a claim on behalf of one of our clients or on behalf of a victim under Georgia law for an unsafe property, we're almost always going to cite the official code of Georgia annotated 51-3-1, which is sometimes called by lawyers the premises liability statute in Georgia. And that says that the people who run the business have to keep the place reasonably safe for their customers and their guests. So 51-3-1 imposes that duty of keeping the property reasonably safe on the owner of the property and on the occupier of the property. Sometimes the person who operates it. For example, a apartment complex might be owned by some LLC or other company headquartered in like Connecticut, but there might be a local property management company that's occupying or operating it. And you can hold either or both liable depending on what the facts are. We often allege negligence, which is sort of a very related concept, but it means the owner or the occupier didn't take reasonable steps, didn't do what a reasonably careful person would have done to keep the property safe. In Georgia, we will often also allege a nuisance. And nuisance, the word itself kind of sounds like it's not a big deal, but in the law it has a specific meaning. And in this context, the context of negligent security, it has an even more specific meaning. And it refers to a property that's operated so poorly that it becomes a magnet for criminals. That criminals coming by who are looking for a place to conduct a robbery or sell drugs or do whatever, if they're likely to pick this place because the security is so lax and they know they'll get away with it, then the property becomes like a magnet for criminals all in the area. And we call that a nuisance. And if that happens, the owner or operator can be held liable for it. And then, of course, there are punitive damages. If the facts are so bad, and we've seen this, if the owner or occupier knew about the risk, knew their customers were in danger, and just didn't do anything about it, then the owner or occupier can be liable for punitive damages, in addition to the normal compensatory damages that compensate you, or compensate victims for the loss that they've experienced. That loss can be any number of things. A lot of these negligent security cases end up being shooting cases, which is why that's what's written at the top of the board. But there could also be stabbings or sexual assaults. And of course, the harm or the loss in each of those is different. Sometimes someone dies and it's a wrongful death case. Sometimes there are just injuries, physical injuries from a gun or a knife. And sometimes if it's a sexual assault case, the damages are psychological. We'll talk last about the types of properties that we deal with in these cases. A lot of them arise at apartments, apartment complexes where owners or occupiers fail to keep their tenants and their tenants' guests safe. If that happens, victims can hold the property owner or occupier liable for those damages, for the loss. We've seen restaurants and bars. In particular, restaurants and bars where the parking lot isn't well secured, or where the crowd inside is rowdy and they know it and don't do anything about it, or they have a person in there who's an obvious problem, an obvious threat, and they fail to kick him out, and instead just keep selling that person drinks until someone finally gets hurt. Hotels. You see some sexual assault cases arising out of hotels that fail to use the proper security measures to keep their guests safe. And then even retail stores. What comes to mind, we have a case involving a gas station where the people inside knew about the crime in the area, knew there was someone right there at that time who was looking to hit a lick, as they sometimes say, or commit a crime, but didn't do anything about it. Instead, just transacted business with a customer until that customer got killed. So these can be really serious cases, they can be really sad cases, but it's becoming more and more prevalent as crime rises for shootings, stabbings, or sexual assaults to occur. It's a time for responsible landowners to step up and do the right thing to keep their customers safe.